Okay, good morning. Welcome to the HR Roundtable. This is part of one of a number of roundtables that Kingston Chambers have been organising as part of Kingston Expo, since we don't have the opportunity to get together and network properly. So a new event for most of us. But my name is Sandra Porter and I run the HR department, which is a HR services company. We're based in Molesey and we've got about 150 clients across North Surrey, Greater London, and obviously had a very manic few months. Between us, just going to ask everybody around the table if you could just quickly do an introduction for who you are and the businesses you run, and then we're going to get started with our conversation. Lisa.
Thank you, Sandra. Good morning. My name is Lisa Fallows and I'm the practice manager at Fallows and Company Chartered Accountants. We're based in Surbiton. One of my big responsibilities is for our team, and obviously that has been increased since COVID-19. We have always been able to work remotely, although most of the time we've worked from the office. And so it wasn't too bad for us in transition working from home. We're now doing half at home and half in the office. So my other big responsibility is the clients. So I've had to deal with it with both sides, and I'm usually the first person they speak to. So I had an interesting first few weeks after the lockdown, and hopefully we're going to discuss how that's changed going forward. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thanks, Lisa. Julie.
Morning, everybody. Thanks, Sandra. Morning, everybody. My name's Julie Leach. I run Julie Leach Associates, which is an HR training and coaching business. I've been running my business for about 3 years now and have a portfolio of clients across London, Surrey and Sussex who I help with outsourced HR training and one-to-one coaching that they need.
Lovely. Thanks, Julie. Rahim?
Hi, morning. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Hi, morning, everyone. Thanks, Sandra. My name's Rahim. I run the White House Nursing Home in New Malden. We are, residents are generally nursing, but we also specialise in end-of-life care. We have 30 residents and 30 staff, and I've probably not worked so hard in the last 4 months than I have ever. It's been a challenging time, as you can imagine, but some important issues to discuss, certainly with staff teams and managing their expectations.
Absolutely. Okay, thanks, Rahim. Jenny.
Good morning, everybody. Very nice to see you virtually. My name is Jenny Smallman. I'm a founding director of Cajun HR Services. We pride ourselves in offering practical, straightforward and commercial HR. And we work generally with employers who employ less than 100 people. In some organisations, we work remotely anyway. And in other organisations, we're embedded in those businesses and work with them on a regular basis, actually on site. And we offer a combination of those services. Like many of you, we have been incredibly busy over this period. And I think it's been a roller coaster, as it will have been for many of you, I'm sure. And I think we've learnt a lot. I think we've had to think fast, think on our feet, remain smart, and hopefully offer our clients a really good service, which the feedback that we've had today has been good. So that's all good. So I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Thanks, Jenny. That's great. Andy. Oh.
Morning. Yeah, my name is Andy Brunton. I run Pinnacle Healthcare, which is an employee benefits brokerage, and that I generally, I specialise in private medical insurance for SMEs and some smaller corporate clients, and then I look after some of the wider employee benefits such as income protection, critical illness cover, life cover. And it's generally, as I said, SME clients. It's been really, really interesting during this period of time. I had no idea how things were going to be affected by things that have happened, specifically around things like medical insurance, with the transition of private hospitals into the NHS. So clients haven't been able to use those services. So it's been really interesting to see how the insurers have coped with that, and then talking to clients about the remote services that the insurers have offered, such as remote GP services, remote consultations, and how that's been managed. And now with the transition back, with the capacity back in private facilities and clients being able to get healthcare and wellbeing services. I've got a wide range of clients across the UK, London, lots up in Norfolk and Cambridgeshire, and lots in the sort of in the Surrey area, in a wide range of sectors from farming to solicitors. So it's been really, really fascinating to see how they've all coped with the changes. So it'd be interesting to know how other people have coped as well. So that's a bit about me.
Thanks very much, Andy. And Lucy.
Hi everyone, I'm Lucy and I'm the Operations and Marketing Manager at Gardenia of London. We are a floristry business with 3 shops in southwest London. We do weddings, events, we have a busy website as well. We've currently got 2 shops still temporarily closed, 1 shop still open, and we've also started selling fruit and veg. So things are changing a lot and every day at the moment. But yeah, it's interesting and still a long way to go.
Absolutely. Okay, thanks ever so much. So obviously it's now been 108 days, I think it is, since Boris Johnson announced that we were going into lockdown. And I think obviously that threw the whole country into a state of emergency about how that was going to impact us as individuals, as it was going to impact our families, our communities, and obviously our businesses. And I'm sure many of us kind of taking those initial guidance around coronavirus, the job retention scheme, and suddenly having a whole new vocabulary of words to learn and translate for everybody around furlough schemes and things. It's been quite a challenging time on all sides of the fence. I really kind of appreciate the quote that we posted recently about how we're all experiencing the same storm, but from very, very different boats. You know, some that have had to close their doors and some whose doors have never been busier. So the reaction has been fascinating to kind of watch and see how that's happened. As for part of this conversation, what we're aiming to do really is to structure it into 3 parts. So one is to reflect on what has been. So reflecting on the last 108 days and how we've experienced that kind of personally for our businesses and for our teams. Then looking at where are we now? So how does it feel as at the 8th of July? And then as we look to the future, what do we think that means in terms of how HR may play a function as part of both kind of growing businesses, restructuring businesses, but the wider impact that HR can have, both from a business and an employee perspective. And really good to get such a broad sense of kind of views of how it's impacted different industries and different sizes of teams, and being able to hopefully take a step back and have a look at that. So if we're good with that, let's start off with just a kind of just general thoughts really on the impact. If you could summarise the impact that COVID has had on your business in a few words, what words kind of spring to mind that have been probably the best summary of the last 108 days?
I'll start then. For me, on my business, I don't think it's had too much of an impact. In terms of the way I work, I set up the business so that we could work remotely, have access to everything remotely. So it hasn't had much of an impact. You know, for instance, I can do everything on the desktop, I can print, scan, do everything all from any location. I think from dealing with a client, from a client's perspective, it's really, a lot of the clients have probably been a bit always wanting a face-to-face meeting, so this has really changed that, and I think that's had a massive impact. And actually, I can have more of as opposed to having to travel 2 or 3 hours to see a client, that they're now more than happy to do it remotely. So I think that has an impact on in a number of ways. it's good for the environment. Actually, you can probably have more of a conversation with the clients because you can see them on a more regular basis, because it's just a matter of putting something in the diary and having 10-15 minute face-to-face discussion with them. So actually you might have an even closer relationship with them. So that's that's the impact it's had for me. I think it's been positive in that sense. I think embracing technology.
Raheem, what do you think? Kind of what few words would you use to describe the impact in your business?
I think unprecedented, traumatic, devastating in some ways, but also I think, echoing on what Andrew said, it's also had a bit of a positive effect in terms of it's galvanized a few people. I think when we go back to March, April, I think we were kind of going to war without any bullets, and I've heard that phrase quite a lot. And I think our focus was purely on how do we keep people safe, how do we keep them alive. And then very quickly, I think within our industry, we learned that you can't, because COVID is it's something that you just cannot protect against. So our shift changed slightly into how do we keep staff teams safe, and how do we look after their welfare and their well-being? Because, you know, when you look at the stats, you know, a huge percentage of people that have lost their lives have been the elderly, and there's been very little people have been able to do about that. But what you can do is support staff teams, and it's how you do that from a management and an HR point of view. So it's been horrible, it's been traumatic, it's been very sad. But, you know, if we look at where we want to be, I think there is a small glimmer of galvanizing teams here, and really putting in practices now for the future. And people talk about second waves and COVID mutations in the future, but I think if you can build resilience now for the future, it probably holds you in good stead. But it's been tough. Honestly, it's been very tough for our industry, and I speak of the industry and personally from the White House.
Can I pick up on something, Raheem? I mean, I think I'm really reassured that you've spent as much time thinking about the welfare and the well-being of your teams, because obviously that's at the heart of everybody's business, or it should be at the heart of everyone's business. And of course, one of the things I think that in doing that you're doing is really maintaining the perception of the employees who work for you. As we were saying slightly earlier, a little bit when we were chatting before this, that I think that's one of the real opportunities for employers. The way that they've behaved throughout this crisis will leave a lasting impression on employees. And I think that's a really valuable thing for employers, that even through this midst of difficulty, and without doubt, I cannot imagine how, you know, I really empathise with your situation. You know, I can't imagine how hard that's been for you and for your teams. But there is an upside, and that galvanizing of teams, that reputation that you're maintaining in really focusing on that, I think is a, and I think just to go back to your point, Sandra, about the, you know, where we are and reflecting on perhaps where we were, you know, there was that crisis phase, wasn't there, where we were all in that moment where many of us were involved in having to get businesses working remotely that perhaps weren't used to do it. And we managed that process as best we could, and we were all sort of like little mice on wheels, just trying to get that, you know, keep people safe and get people out and get people where they needed to be, which at that time was at home. And now many of us are facing perhaps the requirement from employers to return to a more normal day-to-day way of working. And that in itself is presenting many challenges, because employers are sort of saying, you know, well, is it time for us to come back? And of course, for some people, that's very, very soon. And some people have worked all the way through. So I think that's presenting a whole new challenge. And just to the point that Andy made about working remotely, that of course we've all got very savvy with the technology that we're using today, and there is a massive upside to that. But I think we've got to be really careful that we don't throw the baby out with the bathwater and lose the importance of that office environment, lose the importance of working collaboratively, working creatively together. And I think there is a massive value in that we mustn't underestimate. And it's going to be quite a tricky one over the coming weeks to navigate that path with employers and with employees as well, to find a ground that works for everybody as businesses begin to come back to a more normal way of working.
Absolutely. Julie, what's your thoughts? Obviously, having kind of lots of different clients and things, what's been your experience? If you could summarise it in a few words.
It's been really different depending on the client base and the industry the client works in. So obviously, right at the beginning, everybody sort of went into panic mode. What does this mean for us? How are we going to work through this? What is our business going to look like? And actually, how is our business going to survive? What do we need to do to make sure we still have a business at the other end of that? And some of my clients are quite small, and that really matters to them. You know, these are family businesses where, you know, if that business doesn't work, then there's no income for that family. So some of those conversations and decisions were quite hard. But then once everybody's sort of gone through that peak, it's then what's been amazing is people's positivity and people's desire to make this work and to find a way through it. And Lucy is somebody I work with frequently. She's alluded already to the fact that the floristry business, they're now selling fruit and veg, and I think the word people are using at the moment is pivoting their businesses. And I've seen other businesses do this as well. Other businesses that are in other areas of service industry haven't been as impacted, and people are staying at home, and in some areas aren't spending as much money because they're not commuting, they're not going on holiday. So there's money to be spent on other things. So another client is hugely busy and is expanding. So, you know, it really does vary. So on the one hand, there's redundancies that are coming very shortly in some areas of business, and other areas, you know, we're recruiting and setting performance management programs for people who are new hires. So it's really mixed, but I think the overriding message that people have alluded to already is that sort of this overwhelming sort of the desire to succeed and the desire to make some good out of this situation we're in.
Absolutely. Lucy, what's your thoughts following on from Julie's in terms of selling fruit and vegetables? Maybe something you thought you would be doing last year.
Yeah, so it's sort of survival mode, really. So we were closed for about a week, and then Jamie, who owns Gardenia, started doing fruit and veg box deliveries to homes twice a week. And, you know, we're just really sort of going day to day, week to week. We find that we make decisions quite quickly, but because we're quite small, we're able to implement them quite quickly. But I think, you know, we're all just trying to catch up with ourselves a little bit. So for example, I'd say, you know, floristry, thinking about it, everyone that works with us is passionate about floristry, and we are still doing flowers and plants, but obviously our employees are having to come back, and it is a very different role. There are similarities in that it's fresh produce, so there are certain things the same, but it's a lot more physical with the fruit and veg. It's a lot of heavy lifting, and obviously aside of the floristry is the creative, and they are still getting to do elements of that. But, you know, long term, we are probably going to have to look at you know, redefining job roles a little bit, that will of course still include some floristry, but there'll be some other bits to it as well. So I think we're just adapting, and like I said, we're reacting day to day, and similar to what Raheem said, sort of safety is a huge consideration as well for us, because, you know, it's a bit better now that things like buses are a bit safer. But for example, I've been given access to a work vehicle, which has made a big difference, because it's a consideration that you have to think, if you ask someone to come back to work, you know, we've got some florists who get 2 different trains, you know, how are they going to get here, and where does our responsibility for that end? So it's good, it's busy, it's exciting, but there's also a real lot for us to work closely with Julie on piecing it all together once we get to something a bit more stable.
It's a really kind of tricky dynamic, hasn't it? I think for all employers, working out where does my responsibility start and where does it stop. And I think we've certainly found that a lot as well. People thinking, well, am I responsible for how they get to work now? Am I responsible for, do I need to check that they're washing their hands? You know, that's never been part of what an employer would think as their job description before. And suddenly it seems to have suddenly got a bit broader. I think it's very challenging, isn't it, for employers to be compassionate and supportive, but also trying to make sure they understand what their responsibilities are and what their responsibilities aren't. And it's very difficult with so many employees facing levels of anxiety, sometimes particularly around public transport, or working alongside people that are using public transport and how that might therefore affect them. It's really challenging. Lisa, I just want to come to you as well there, just in terms of your thoughts over the last few months. How would you summarise your experience?
I think initially, like everybody, We were lucky in a way with our team. We're only a small team of 8 people, because they were very good at adapting to working at home. They were able, we were already geared up for working remotely, which hearing other stories of people was a massive help to us. But the side of it that was obviously exhausting and worrying was the clients, really. So Guy and I came into the office still. We needed to man the phones, and we're a registered office for a lot of clients. And obviously we're married, so we were okay to be in the office together. And I was answering the phones, which I don't normally. So that became a big challenge, because obviously you've got a lot of people, very worried people, understandably. Some clients very panicked, a bit like Julie's experience, very varied. And we're obviously their trusted advisor. So they're looking to us for help and support, which obviously we're happy to give them. And I think the biggest challenge we found was trying to interpret the business help that was out there. And furlough, which we also had never heard of, suddenly become what we needed to be experts on, because we were then helping other people do that. So we spent the first few weeks sending out, interpreting the information, and then sending out help things to our clients to try to steer them in the right direction. But obviously it was changing daily. So this and I think our team found it very hard, because they were getting calls and they were expected to know things that clearly they don't know. So they had to sort of say, well, I don't know that yet. We'll have to wait for further information. And, you know, we had to kind of feed them information. So I think that was very hard on them, because they're used to being trained on something and then they deliver a service. Yeah. Whereas this was having to be trained instantly and then try to provide, and then it would change the next day. So for me, it was important that we could share with them as much knowledge as we could, and to say to them, it's okay to say you don't know. You know, you don't know, we haven't had the information yet. I'll try to find out and I'll come back to you. So I think that was important. Going back to something Jenny said about returning to the office, we have actually started returning to the office, because I would like to say what Jenny said is important. We found that discussing with our team, although they liked being at home for an initial period, they were starting to feel that they needed to be in the office sometimes. They needed more interaction, they needed more help. And so they decided, or we decided collaboratively, if they wanted to come back, that I would make sure the office was safe, that they could do so. And I think a lot of people haven't reached that stage yet, but I would say, you know, try to do that. Try to assess your office, put in the measures. It's worth it, I would say.
I think I'd like to just to pick up on that. The government has provided us with really good advice as to how to create a COVID secure environment for employees. I think the bit where there's the opportunity again is to really think about how we communicate that to people. And in some businesses, when we've set up either an office or an environment that is now considered COVID secured and for employees to return to, you're going as far as making suggestions to employers like, you know, take photographs of what it looks like now beforehand, do some online training with them, show them what it looks like. And in doing that, you're building that confidence to get people to come back. And on the point about travel, I mean, I think this is one of the hardest things. And depending on where your business is, of course, that impacts you greatly. You know, whether you've got park and get people to cycle to work, whether they tube, whether they've got to use trains, and giving people that flexibility and communicating to people appropriately about those arrangements is the thing that's going to get us back. And I think we have to balance our fear of this situation that we've been through, with the requirement to move the economy forward and to get businesses moving again, because some businesses have had to pause, and it is a momentary pause, and the furlough schemes helped them, but we do need to get things going again, because not to is going to be an even graver economic crisis in the longer term. So it's balancing that. And I think that's really the value that, I hope that we are offering to some of the businesses that we're working, is helping, our employers and business owners navigate that path with integrity and with care and with proper thought and with consultation with people, but also just really focusing on the requirement to do what the business does, sell flowers, run a care home, offer training and development, whatever that is, be an accountancy firm. So I think we've all got really good at change, which is what we're really talking about. We have undergone a massive period of change, and how we respond to that will determine the outcomes, I think, in the longer term. And most of us, I love a bit of change, but on these terms, when it's imposed on us in the way that this has been, it's been really difficult, I think, for many.
I think it's been really interesting from a HR function point of view, because I don't know kind of your own experiences, but I think sometimes the HR function can be deemed as, you go to them when something's happened, when you have to, it's kind of compliance related, or you've got a disciplinary to deal with, and you kind of, it's a necessary evil in the best sense possible. I
would never say that, Sandra.
And I'm sure likewise, we know when we work with lots of accountants, and it's similar, they come to you to do their tax returns and to for compliance, to make sure that they're doing what they should do. But it seems like suddenly the HR and kind of accountancy professions have been dropped into the limelight to suddenly become just absolute experts in, just to your point, Lisa, them coming to us saying, well, what's the answer? And we were really clear as a team to say, it's not that we don't know the answer, it's that sometimes the answer doesn't yet exist. So we're hoping the answer is going to exist next Thursday when we get the next iteration of the furlough leave rules, or, the job retention scheme rules. And it's like trying to manage that communication, that it's not that we don't know, it's just that they're thinking these through at the same time. But it feels like we've gone from being compliance, go to when you need to suddenly, actually, we need to be great change managers and helping them think through the practical implications of transport, health and safety measures, return to work technology, those things, but also about, to Raheem's earlier point, about how do we help teams build resilience? It's a really good point, because it's like, how does the HR function now help businesses to be able to adapt, be able to pivot, as we've already said, and be able to build that resilience to be able to cope with whatever might come, whether it is a second wave or whether it's just that businesses are then different forevermore. So are you finding that, Andy, in the healthcare sector? Are you finding that?
Yeah, I was going to say there's been I tend to work with HR people and finance directors, depending on the size of the business. But there's certainly been people looking at being more proactive in that space. So there's been a marked increase in the request for things like employee assistance programs, because having a duty of care to employees to try and support them. It's one thing thinking, oh great, we can now work remotely and maybe 2 or 3 days at home and 2 or 3 days in the office. But just yesterday on a call trying to get something done with the bank, all's going well, but then suddenly I heard in the background the baby crying, and the person's trying to do their job as well as support their newborn baby, and you think, well, actually that person is probably under quite a lot of stress and strain. So those employees need the support in place to be able to make a call to somebody if they need to. So an employee assistance program is certainly something that's been there's been a high increase in the request for quotes and information on that, and it's something that's very, very cost effective that people can put in place. So I've seen a big increase, and also the request for new medical insurance schemes and information on the benefits that companies have already got in place, like income protection and life cover and things like that. So they can send that information out to employees to say, look, you've got these things in place. If you need them, you can use them. Now it's more than ever having things in place to support employees, but actually telling employees about the things you've already got in place. That's been the thing that's increased more in the last 3 months than I've seen before.
Sandra, can I just
Yeah.
go back to something that was mentioned earlier? We were talking about how, whether from the HR or the accountancy point of view, you've needed to become an expert overnight in the new terminology and how new legislation works. The thing that struck me as I was going through those first few weeks was the sense of how everybody was in this together. And whilst it was a really difficult situation, nearly every conversation I had was really positive. Nobody was getting cross or angry or losing their patience. Everybody, there was just, you know, as awful as it's been, there's just been this sort of togetherness that we are all in this together. And whether you're supporting people from an HR perspective and an accountancy perspective or whatever it is you're offering,
Julie,
business owners are trying
you.
to work out, you know, what things mean for them. So I think that's been quite positive from my point of view.
There's been a sense of camaraderie in that we don't know the answers, we're going to have to work it out, and it is each day at a time, wasn't it, really, for a while? Although it already feels like it was years away to me. It feels like 108 days, feels like it's about a year ago. It's just so much has happened. Rahim, how are you feeling in terms of, you know, you originally mentioned about resilience. What are your thoughts in terms of learnings from the last few months and what that means for you over the coming 3 months, 6 months?
Yeah, and sorry, my connection keeps dropping out, so apologies if you see me and then I disappear and I'm back.
We're doing a tour of your house at the same time. Don't come back. Okay. Oh.
Sorry, I'm back. Hi, can you hear me? Sorry, I'm back.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, I think I certainly think, like I said earlier, it is building resilience now. I mean, something simple like, I know earlier we mentioned traveling to work, but you know, it's not so easy for staff, for us, because, well, for our staff, because public transport becomes a bit of a hazard. So we've had to implement things like giving every single staff member a staff pack with gloves, sanitizer, and mask in just to come to work. We've tried to, you know, we've provided pool cars, bicycles. You know, we've literally tried everything to reduce the risk of staff bringing COVID-19 into the building. So coming to work, you know, it's a challenge, and everything's a challenge at the moment. I think going forward, certainly, it really is just about building resilience. Now we've got staff that are shielding at the moment. I'm not really sure how they come back into work, because on the 1st of August, apparently that they're all allowed to come back to work. But you know, there are risk assessments that need to be carried out.
I think that's quite daunting for some employers, the thought of that, people who are currently shielding and bringing them back into the workplace. But there is good guidance out there. You just have to either find it or have someone to help you find it and navigate that. And those risk assessments, perhaps, you know, the thought of doing them is worse than the actual practicality of it. When you actually come to it, it's not going to be, I don't think, quite as bad as we might think. And you know, we're talking about resilience, but what does that actually mean? You know, what are we talking about here? Are we talking about equipping people with the skills and capabilities to work in this new environment? And are we talking about how we communicate with people? For me, that's at the heart of everything that's happened throughout this, whether that's us giving advice to employers or whether or not that's employees coming to us and saying, can you help me with this? And I think you know, I mean, you will have heard me mention the word communication about 50 times already, but, you know, for me, that's at the heart of everything, that where things haven't gone so well, it's because people have been poorly communicated to, rather than because what's been said has been difficult. So, you know, if you think about what Lucy said earlier about changing job roles and things like that for some employers who are without doubt having to face those challenges, the difficulties of redundancy, the difficulties of all of the changes that we've had to acknowledge, if we're communicating people with people as appropriately and sensibly as we can, then in some instances that's the best that we've been able to do.
I think that's something we really noticed, which is similar, is that when in those first few weeks, obviously we were all in it together, and goodness, it was a busy time. But one of the things that I think became quite clear to us as where some of our clients had real trust with their employees and where they didn't. And I think some of that was because of communication. I think some preferred to not communicate until it was perfect, whereas others communicated just as openly as they could, knowing that they didn't have all the answers. And I think we really kind of stepped back and thought, God, the reaction of some of the teams and the MDs or the chief execs, some of those reactions were very telling of just the relationship, the general relationship that they had up until the 21st of March. Because of some teams, they seem to be quite comfortable in saying, okay, we'll do that. We'll go on furlough, or we'll change our roles, or we'll suddenly become a fruit and veg business, or we'll suddenly, one of our clients is Wags and Tails in Surbiton, and overnight they become a delicatessen doing deliveries rather than a coffee house. And, that some just seem to go with that quite easily, and other businesses seem to kind of be at loggerheads quite quickly. And I thought that it's very telling of trust, and a communication being such a big part of that. And it's, hopefully is how do we as a HR function help businesses think more about their communication, about being quite creative really in the ways that they communicate. To Jenny's point, some of our businesses have been creating videos. So the MD's gone in and done a video around the office saying, this is what we've done. We've got this signage. We're going to use this form. We're going to meet every Friday. And just to kind of give that sense of reassurance, which is just making all of the difference. It's how we help businesses see what other businesses are doing, to share some of that best practice, to help.
And I think that's been particularly helpful from our point of view, where we're working with many organisations in many different settings. We're not sector specific, so that you have that experience that you can take, and that's very much been the role. We've been able to say, well, in another setting this has worked, have you tried that, or have you thought about that? And I think that's been one of the real benefits to some businesses in the involvement that we've had over this time, is being able to share those ideas and those suggestions that have come through.
I think
Jenny, what also leads on from that is, you can see, again, going back to the point you made, Sandra, about how people manage and lead their businesses in different ways. And when you have the ability to have a view on lots of different businesses, there's a spectrum as to how people communicate and manage and lead their teams. And whether we're in this situation or before or after, we have the ability to take what we see in other businesses and share that knowledge that we see, and help maybe those leaders or managers who have less confidence, or whose skill level is at a different level, upskill them and help them enhance what they do. Because I believe that a lot of the success that businesses have comes down to the management and leadership of the business, and the communication, the trust they have with their teams. So that's really interesting. A point, I suppose, we're looking into the future when we come out the other side.
Yeah. Lisa, were you going to say something as well then? Sorry, Andy. Lisa, were you going to say something?
Yeah, it's fine. I was just going to say, obviously, we're a very small business, and one of the things I think sometimes, going back to what you said earlier, is business owners try to pretend everything's fine and share information with their employees, and then suddenly everything's awful. So I think it's important. What we try to do is say to them, this is what we need to, how much work we need to do to make the business work. They have targets, they look at it, they get involved, because I think if they understand the difficulties that you're going through, then they're more likely to jump on board and understand the decisions that you've made. If you try to just hide everything and not share it with your team, then you're not doing yourselves any favours, and then it's difficult to get them on board with what you're trying to do. So I would certainly encourage people to share more of their figures, their successes, the things that aren't working well, the things that are working well. We sort of do that every week. We have a catch up on Monday morning, what's gone well last week, what hasn't gone so well, who's done something great, what we need to, people that are not very happy with us, whatever it is. And I found that they have been really responsive in getting on board with what we want to do as a result of that.
Yeah,
it's so reassuring to hear that, Lucy. You know, I think that that's fundamental to the success of a business, really. But it is really, really reassuring to hear that kind of thing. But I think sometimes that's hard for employers because you haven't necessarily, or business owners, you haven't necessarily got all of the good news to share that you would normally have, and you haven't always got the solution. So I think one of the challenges that we face, we've definitely encouraged employers to be as really candid with people, really frank, really plain speaking, really straightforward with their teams. And where that's happened, that's worked really, really well. But for those employers who are used to being in control, who are used to having a plan, having their strategy clearly laid out, it's been really hard. And I think that's where we've sometimes been able to be helpful in that, to help them with that, and just go, look, it's okay not to know at the moment, you know, just share the news.
Yeah, there's a reality, isn't there? Andy, were you going to say something then? Sorry, Andy.
Yeah, I was just interested, really. You talked about communications and how that's really key. I mean, I've got clients who have 6-7 employees, and that's probably quite easy because they're a very small knit team. Up to the larger clients where they might have benefits platforms where they can roll out such communications. But it's those ones in between. And Jenny, you mentioned yours is up to sort of 100 employees, and I guess those are the ones where my type of clients tend to have the most difficulty in communications. So. How do you do it, and how do you do that with clients, and what do you recommend in terms of communications, especially now?
I think you can do it in lots of different ways. I think some of it, if you've got a line management structure, I think those people have been critical to the success in those environments. So I think where you've got a line manager structure, you can use that as a good communication tool. I think you can communicate via email. You can also have much more informal communication as well. Teams have done masses of fun stuff throughout this miserable time too. I actually attended myself a virtual 70s karaoke party, which was across a number of countries, and those kinds of things have been very positive. So it doesn't have to all be about the business, it can be about the other stuff as well, what's going on in people's lives. So I think you have to find the different touch points and communicate in an appropriate way. And sometimes I really do not think you can underestimate the value of picking up this, which is a phone, and just speaking to people one-to-one. And we've done a good deal of that, and that's been really valuable for people, I think.
We've just had a comment on the chat as well from Katerina Kova, just saying that kind of they've really found that by utilising technology as much as possible to aid better communication has been really, really successful, and something that they really want to hold on to. So we don't just go back to what we did before, as well as which bits, what learnings do we take from the last few to go it, I don't know why what are the learnings?
I don't know if it's me, Sandra, but it doesn't sound very good, the sound.
I know, the sound's gone strange.
So you're all right now.
So if communication is something we want to kind of utilise in different forms of communication, something we want to hold on to, what other things do we think that we've learned that we want to continue to use going forward, and how HR might be able to support that?
Does somebody else want to speak on that?
Sorry, I'm back. Sorry, what was that?
We seem to have a few gremlins.
We do. We're talking about the importance of technology. We suddenly have technology.
What I was going to add after Jenny said that was obviously we all talked about remote working. And I think Raheem touched on this earlier. So, yes, I think, making sure, some people have put stop gaps in, just to manage this time, but this needs to be a more long-term solution. So I think, you know, there is going to be probably a second wave. I mean, not to be pessimistic, but, you know, we need to now have a different action plan. And I think with that comes also we were talking about earlier, the well-being of the teams, because working from home for a long period of time, you know, does require a different mindset and a different support mechanism. So as well as the physical, practical side of it, there needs to be something written out of how you're going to manage the well-being side of it. And one of the things that I think is difficulty, which I'm sure everybody's found, is separating your home life from your work life if you're not used to working from home. So we just put a simple thing like a WhatsApp group to say, good morning, I've started my day, I've finished for the day. And that was the point at which everybody then would we're not going to bother you anymore. You know, so they weren't getting unnecessary work things when they didn't want work things, and everybody knew they were available or not available.
There is a risk, isn't there, of having it starting an always on culture where people really blur the boundaries of just kind of always being able to sit at their dining table and log on and trying to make sure that there is a distinction between, okay, stop your working day. Otherwise it can be really stressful if they just feel like they have to respond to every email no matter what time it comes in, and trying to be clear about that from the outset, isn't it? As you say, that, okay, let's formalize kind of what that's going to look like, and practically having a WhatsApp group helps. Julie, anything in terms of what you think in terms of how HR can be used to support a lot of these changes as we go forward?
I think we've touched on a lot of things already, and like Jenny has mentioned, communication is key all the way through, and I would still see that going forward, if teams have seen an increase in the level of communication from their management and leadership, then that's a good thing, and that should probably continue. What we don't want to do is sort of return to some sort of normality, and everybody sort of disappears back when they've maybe come together either virtually or really as a stronger team through this. What I also think is quite interesting, and I remember talking to a friend about this in the park some weeks ago, is that, I mean, I, as we all do, believe passionately in HR and think that it's, hugely important when you're managing a business and looking after your people. I think people are amongst the most important asset you have in your company. You can have amazing technology, amazing marketing, but if you don't have the right people, then what business do you really have? And that's just my personal view. But HR sometimes is held at arm's length because we're seen as people that have only ever got the bad news. We do all the dirty work, or, oh God, don't get HR involved, they always say no, all of that sort of thing. But I think over the last few months, the industry has shown how important we are for lots of different reasons. And I remember saying to my friend, it's only taken a pandemic for people to realise that HR have a voice and have something valuable to add. And I really hope that all of us in this industry, through what we've done over the last few weeks, clients, potential clients, or people that we know or work with have gone, we couldn't have done this without HR. They've really added some value. They've really helped us through. And I know there'll be a lot of people listening that are already converted to what we can do and the value that we add. But for those people who were unsure, hopefully they'll have seen that there is value to be added, and people are incredibly important in what we do, and that we can help them manage that. Sorry, I'll get off my soapbox now.
We're up there with you, Julie, don't worry. We've got 10 minutes left of the conversation, so I just thought maybe we could just start thinking about, so say we project forward at, say, this time next year, and hopefully we'd actually be at Kingston Expo rather than having to maybe do it virtually and actually have a cup of coffee together. But in a year's time, what do you think you would be kind of success? What would success look like to you when you think about from the 8th of July 2020 to this time next year? What would success have felt like, you think, if we do a really good job over the next 12 months in terms of supporting businesses? Thoughts?
Go on, Rahim, you go.
Good.
There you go.
Echo the last sentiment, really. I mean, to be honest, HR's not really been a huge part of our business. It never really has been. And it's a shame that it's taken something like COVID to put HR on the map. because really, I mean, we're even looking at having like an HR champion at work, you know, somebody that really looks after staff teams,
Great.
Staff welfare. And I think, you know, mental health has become such an issue. And I think the effects of COVID they're going to be long lasting. And I think if you're looking at HR with staff teams, it's supporting people to get through this for the long run. So where we're going to be in a year's time, honestly, I really don't know when people do talk about second waves and COVID mutations, and then we've got influenza around the corner with Christmas and the cold weather. So, you know, I think really it's just supporting every single member of staff that you have, in terms of looking at their mental health, looking at their well-being, and just working with different staff teams, and then at the same time integrating people back into the business that have been shielding or that have been furloughed, and doing that in a safe way.
Absolutely.
And I think one of the key roles that we can help employers with is by supporting them as well, because of the fact that I'm sure, Sandra, you find it as well, that well, many of us around the table today, you know, we are working very closely with the businesses that we work with. We get to know them very well, and that trust is really built up. And then you can be that sounding board to that employer, to that business owner, and help them navigate that path. So I think you're right, as an employer, Raheem, without doubt, in supporting your employees is great, but the role that HR can play can also be in supporting you as you make those decisions, and being that neutral person that you can discuss your concerns openly and frankly and candidly with whoever you work with as well. I think that's a massive part that we can play.
I think it's interesting, back to what Lisa said earlier, just as accountants are kind of trusted advisors to the business owners, as are often kind of in-house or outsourced HR providers, that hopefully that trusted advisor in terms of how the business owner responds personally and how they're dealing with that stress. I certainly know a lot of our clients have been very stressed and feeling that pressure, but also how they develop their business and kind of helping them think strategically through how their business needs to adapt and survive, if not thrive. And also, of course, to Raheem's point, kind of being able to support the employees and things like Andy mentioned earlier about whether that's investing in employee assistance programs, different kind of medical benefits, just because they might have much greater sense of value than they would have done in January. You know, the world has changed so much since, isn't it? Lisa, what do you think in terms of how we move forward and what success would look like in 12 months' time?
Well, I think the first stage is just trying to get people back confidently to being able to work in the environment and the office, and that's going to take some time. I think one of the other things, sort of going a little bit away from, but I was thinking about, was in terms of employing people. You know, when people start to employ new people, I'm certainly having a look at as a small business, we don't tend to have offered some of the things that maybe the large companies have offered, and I think we need to completely rethink what we're offering employees. You know, it's not just about salary. Going back to what Andrew said, certainly life insurance is something we'd be looking at, more flexibility with working. And I think people are going to expect more of the other things and the caring things and the, you know, and rightly so, really. So that's going to be a big change. I think how you employ people, under what circumstances, is going to be a massive change. And I think that's where HR can help, particularly small businesses, change the way they're recruiting and what they're offering when they're recruiting.
Being able to provide that, as we said before, like kind of almost being able to share best practice, and because sometimes you don't know what you don't know, do you? Lots of people hadn't even heard of employee assistance programs before, and suddenly it's probably one of the biggest updates we've had in the last few months. It's suddenly gone to the top of the list. Julie, anything else from you in terms of success in the year?
Sorry, Sandra, I missed that. You broke up a bit.
Anything else from you, as we've only got 5 minutes left, but anything else from you in terms of what success would look like in a year?
Oh goodness, a vaccine.
In one word, nicely said. Goodness, we hope so. Hey, absolutely.
Yeah.
Andy, anything else from you?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's certainly a trend with well-being and supporting employees and looking after their physical and mental health. And I think if that trend continues and people start believing that actually trying to retain employees through wellness programs and supporting them and looking after their staff, if that trend continues, then I think I'll be quite happy with that. Certainly, I can see the clients that I've got where they've got excellent staff retention. They just look after their employees, and it costs so much to take somebody on and retrain them and get them up to full capacity. Then actually, if you look after your current staff, then that's definitely the way forward, and things are going to change. With remote working and if people are doing full-time remote working and they're not seeing people, well, that's going to have a massive impact. So there needs to be a support network around that.
Absolutely, yeah, indeed. And Lucy, anything from you? We can't see you, but hopefully you can hear me. Anything from you in terms of what success would look like in a year's time? I'm not sure if you're there or not. I'm talking to a circle. Okay. Hopefully, Lucy, if you can hear me, then jump in whenever. But I think it's really interesting. Looking at the themes through our conversation about obviously kind of the lessons learned, and it's, if anything, it's really forced. I think the businesses that we've seen that have really been able to kind of thrive through this last 108 days, is those have been really creative. They're being really creative at being able to think about how to support their teams, putting in place different measures to suit the individual, to bring together their teams, to pivot their business, to start doing new services. And I think that creativity has been, in some cases, really inspiring, and hopefully it kind of helps people think about how they can just actually, when forced to it and their back's against the wall, be able to really kind of get energy and creativity at those times to be able to do the best things for their business, and hopefully therefore be able to retain their teams and their business to survive over the longer term. Obviously there's certainly lots to do, isn't there, with policies, potentially medical benefits, changing benefits, ways of working, communication mechanisms. I think HR is certainly going to be busy over the next 6-12 months. We'll all be needing a gin and tonic in a year's time. I know that. It's been really fascinating having this conversation. It's been so nice to be able to take a step back for an hour and think about where we've got to so far and what the future holds. But just want to thank all the people that we can see that are listening to the conversation. Obviously this is being recorded, and so will be able to be seen and distributed later on. But just a huge thank you to everybody on the call, and to everybody that's attended the roundtable for your candid thoughts and ideas for best practice to help us all to go forward. Wish everybody the best of luck, and hopefully see you at Kingston Expo this time next year. But thanks ever so much. I know I'll puzzle cross again soon. Thank you. Take care, everybody.
Thanks for sharing, Sandra.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
No worries. Thanks, Julie. Bye.